Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this timely and important conversation on geopolitics and defense in the changing world and India's role in global security. To introduce myself briefly, my name is Radhe, and I'm from Chennai. I did my business and law degree from Gujarat National Law University, worked for a couple of years in Mumbai as a lawyer, and now doing my master's at Stanford Law. I'm so proud and happy to share the dais with our eminent guests today on a topic very close to my heart, India. We live in a very interesting time today. In so many ways, we're at an inflection point in global affairs, marked by great power rivalries, regional conflicts, technological disruptions, and evolving alliances. As the world grapples with shifting centers of power, India stands at a fascinating crossroads. It's a rapidly rising economic and strategic force, but deeply rooted in non-alignment, yet increasingly being drawn into global security frameworks. Important questions. What does warfare mean in today's world? What does defense against war or threats to security mean? Does it mean aggression? Does it mean self-defense? Or does it mean equipping yourself with tools of aggression so one day maybe you could self-defend? To help unpack these pivotal questions, I'm honored to be joined by three distinguished voices. You heard a bit about each of them, but I'm happy to give you some background on why they're here today. Dr. Arzan is a leading expert and scholar on Indian military strategy and regional security issues in the Indo-Pacific region. Prior to his scholarly career, he served for 13 years in the Australian Defense Department in various analytical and liaison positions, including a diplomatic posting to the Australian Embassy in DC. He earned a PhD in war studies from the King's College London and an MSc from the London School of Economics. He's now a research scholar with us at Stanford Center for International Security and Cooperation. We're also honored to be joined by Asha Jadeja, who is a Silicon-based tech investor, entrepreneur, and who has deep insights into the role of innovation and technology in building community. She was also one of the pioneering Indian women venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And Professor Dr. Sumit, who is the senior fellow at Hoover Institution and director of the US-Indian Relations at Stanford University. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, and he's the editor and co-editor of 20 books on the Indo-Pacific region. So thank you all for being here. Let's give our guests a round of applause. So I'd like to propose today's discussion be divided thematically to address two very pressing issues. First, shifts in global power structures, and second, warfare in the 21st century. Let's dive into our first theme. First, I have a question. We're seeing tectonic shifts in global power structures, from US-China tensions, we all know about the tariff war, the India-Pakistan tensions, the recent attacks, and major realignments in the Indo-Pacific, indicated through shifts in investment. We know more companies are setting up in different locations than perhaps what they would have preferred earlier, a couple of years ago. And in this changing landscape, how do each of you assess India's current strategic posture, response to recent incidents, and its role in terms of the Asia-Pacific as well as a global security actor? Tough question, but let's start with the hard ones. We can start with you, Arzan.
All right, thank you very much. That question basically is the question that will cover everything in this panel, I think. I was told, look, let's have a little bit of discussion, all right? So let me start off by proposing an argument that is, I'll be as quick as possible, but proposing an argument that is trying to set up what I see as a critical dichotomy in India's role in the region. Number one, exactly as you said, there are tectonic shifts in global power, and India is a key part of that. However, my argument is that as much as we in India and in the United States and in other like-minded countries want to see a powerful and active India in the region, which I think we all do, my argument, my counterpoint to that, is that that often comes up against hard physical realities. And what I mean by this is that while India's power has undeniably grown in recent decades, if you look at one particular dyad, one particular pairing of countries, that is India, China, then over the span of the 21st century, let's say, the last 2 to 3 decades, the picture is actually not good for India. China's power has actually grown faster than India's. The delta between China and India has grown, not shrunk. Now, maybe that delta will, in the future, shrink. All estimates suggest it will. But in the last couple of decades, the delta has grown on economic power, certainly on military power, I would suggest even on regional political influence. So that is the hard reality, the big reality that Indian decision makers have to face. And compounding it is the other physical reality that to India's west remains, albeit a smaller country, where the delta between India and Pakistan is actually also growing. It nevertheless retains the capacity, as we've seen this week, to capture Indian attention and focus. And when it captures Indian attention and focus, that means that Indian attention and focus and material capacity is not being used to shape the region. I'll leave it there.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Arzan has said. This doesn't seem to be. Okay. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that my colleague Arzan has said. And just to augment and to bolster what he said, China, under Deng Xiaoping, embarked on a process of economic liberalization and opening to the world in 1980. India waited till 1991, only in the wake of an unprecedented fiscal crisis, which left it little or no choice. And subsequently, its attempts at further economic reform have been fitful, which is characteristic of a democracy. You cannot, by fiat, bring about economic reform. And despite that, India has made significant progress and remains still the fastest growing economy in the world. But the problem is the lag that India suffers from, given that it started this process of economic reform much later, and that the process of reform has been fitful. I also happen to agree with Arzan that India still lacks the material capabilities to tackle the PRC. This became evident in the wake of the Galwan crisis of the spring of 2020. Subsequently, India has sought to bolster its capabilities along the Himalayan border, but beyond that, it needs to start thinking about an asymmetric strategy. And that asymmetric strategy involves expanding Indian naval power. India does not have the capacity of what is called sea denial, which is what would get the attention of the PRC, because so much of the hydrocarbons that the PRC relies on comes from the Middle East, and there are important choke points that it faces in transferring those hydrocarbons back to the mainland. This is where India should be investing and developing far better capabilities to, in the event of a crisis, to make the PRC pay an extraordinarily high price on the high seas. However, that capability is only being developed incrementally, and India needs to truly expedite those capabilities if it wishes to pursue an asymmetric strategy which would jeopardize the PRC's ability to constantly and periodically exert pressure on the Himalayan border. On the Western front, I also happen to agree with Arzan that there is this pesky neighbor which periodically comes like a gnat into your house and stings you. And the asymmetries between Pakistan and India are growing, but Pakistan retains considerable nuisance value, as it demonstrated vividly earlier this week.
Absolutely. So I fully agree with what Arzan and Sumit just mentioned so, so articulately. So here is how I view the way things are reshaping, way power is getting sort of realigned and reshaped in the global arena. On the ground level, there is what Arzan plus Sumit just mentioned, along with the tariff war. That's sort of happening at the ground level and even at sort of a mid-level. But what I'm seeing right now coming out of the US, which still is a preeminent power in the geopolitical international system, it still is a very powerful entity. And it seems to have a different vision for what it wants the future, how it wants the future to unfold. To my eyes, what the US seems to want right now is, number one, to make sure that it minimizes Chinese power. And it's not just doing this through tariffs, but it's also doing it through other geopolitical means, including information warfare, making sure that they have restricted access to our chips, to our technologies, and perhaps even some propaganda wars that we might engage in going forward. So number one, we are quite laser focused in the US on getting Chinese power minimized. What does that mean? That basically means sort of preponderance of America as the one unipolar superpower on the planet. Now, for the US to once again become more of a unipolar superpower, it needs alliances which are not the usual ones. It is still, it has Europe and the Latin America and Americas, but it did not have India in the way it has now openly and including through the Biden administration, through Trump 1.0 and Biden administration. There's a clear recognition of the geostrategic importance of India being in the American orbit. And we are seeing from the Trump administration aggressive efforts to rope in India. It's India that is slow. It's the Indian bureaucracy that has its own reservations, sometimes some of them justified, some unjustified. But there is a slowness from the Indian side, which we are all trying to make sure that we allay some of those fears and make sure that India signs off on a few things, including the bilateral trade agreements, some geopolitical defense agreements, ports, shipbuilding, and the naval alliances. But I think the bigger thing that's happening, even above this sort of this suprastructure, I think is an interesting dynamic that's evolving. And I don't know if it's just me who's seeing it. Sumit, you probably give me your thoughts on this. I'm also seeing, when I see conversations between Elon Musk, Trump, Giorgia Meloni, and the AfD in Germany, when I see conversations where they are talking about, Christianity, the Western civilization, bringing power back to the Western civilization, making Western civilization great again. So when you see Giorgia Meloni and the Germans talking about a civilizational effort now to bring back the core values of the Enlightenment and speaking about, I wonder if there's a civilizational thing going on, and you guys probably see this at a high level of sort of, what does this mean when we hear these conversations? Should we attribute any meaning and any salience to this, or is this just sort of a temporary blip in the geopolitical environment? I'm not sure, but it's an interesting time, and the conversations now with Modi. So the four people that I see very, having rigorous phone calls and meetings are Musk, Giorgia Meloni, Trump, and Modi. These four are very powerful nodes in this international system. And they're speaking about some stuff which I can't connect the dots there yet. But there's something profoundly important going on there, which I'm trying to sort of see, and maybe you guys can shed some light there. But I think it will have implications for many centuries, for many generations to come, if these alliances shift.
Thank you for sharing your poignant perspectives on this very pressing issue. And as Arzan described, it's really the question, right? And I think the discussions in terms of India's role begs the second question, which is, do you think India being part of global forums like the BRICS, the Quad, the G20 is punching its weight? Or do you think that there's more ground to cover before it becomes a true global security stakeholder? Let's hear from you, Dr. Sumit, first.
Well, the short answer is no. But I'm not going to let it go at that. I'll elaborate on why I said no.
Tim for the why.
It's wonderful to host the G20, but that alone does not reflect national power. Yes, it does show that India matters in the global system, that its growing economy, the possibilities of investment in India, India's acquisition of any number of complex defense platforms are desirable. But let me start with the BRICS. The BRICS are crumbling, okay? They're crumbling because there are internal contradictions in the BRICS. Russia's economy is smaller than that of Italy, for crying out loud. If it weren't for hypersonic weapons and its nuclear weapons and petroleum resources, Russia is a declining power. Let's get this straight. All the statistical evidence tells us that Russia's prospects as a great power are pinned on those three items that I mentioned. It has a major demographic problem, which it cannot solve. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. China and India are fundamentally at odds. Anybody who believes otherwise is living in a fool's paradise. There might be a brief pause in the conflict, in the tensions, but this is merely a pause. This is an enduring rivalry that's not going to go away because the PRC sees India as an upstart. It does not recognize India as a peer, and anyone who believes otherwise is smoking a weed I was familiar with in college. And I did inhale, unlike a president. So I let it rest at that.
All right. I'll be as quick as possible. Number one, the G20 was a spectacle. Good, a spectacle. Number two, the BRICS is a non-event. It's not even crumbling. It's a non-event. It does nothing, right? And in fact, probably the greatest utility of the BRICS for India is the fact that India can act as a spoiler to China and its ambitions to use the BRICS to enlarge its power. The minilateral that matters the most is the Quad, I would argue. I'm a little bit biased, but I think the Quad has potential, if certain actions are taken smartly, to meaningfully change regional politics and even global politics. Jaishankar is on the record as saying there is a reason we care about the Quad, that we actively participate in the Quad, and that's because the existing international architecture is not fit for purpose for the problems that confront India and the region today. The Quad is a sort of grouping that could, if it takes more material, concrete actions, especially in the security sphere, serve that role, right? But I want to conclude by addressing where we've touched on a really profound and interesting question, which is the nature of power today, right, in the international system. Asha touched on it, Sumit has touched on it. And if you'll permit, I know we're here talking about India, right? But if you'll permit me, when we say that the United States' primary focus is containing Chinese power, I think that's generally true of the US national security elite. But if you look at some of the decisions that have been taken in the last few months, that is not how the United States is acting. Things like removing American political economic influence from the global south does not serve American interests in limiting Chinese power. Ending American scientific research does not serve American interests in limiting Chinese power. Okay? And when we talk about relationships between the likes of Trump and Putin and AfD, right, I don't think this is about Western civilization at all. In fact, to the extent that it is civilizational, it is a particular vision of civilization that does probably not include most of the people in this room. What we do see, however, is an impulse to carve up the world into old-style, 19th century style spheres of influence, where the United States has a sphere, where Europe is different to that sphere, and the United States is no longer responsible for European security, where Russia is different, where China is different, and potentially, this is the bright spot for India, the Indian government may see this vision of power as an opportunity to carve out its own sphere of influence. I don't think India's there yet, and I'm skeptical that it will be able to, but this may be the place where people's heads are at.
Thank you, Arzan. Thank you, Dr. Sumit. I have a specific question for you, Asha. How can Indian origin innovators and investors in Silicon Valley and globally, I believe we were discussing this just before the panel too, contribute to India's defense and security ambitions, especially in areas like AI, cybersecurity, dual-use tech, and position it as a leader?
So there are a few initiatives that already were put in place in the last couple of administrations, including IMEC, the India, Middle East, Israel-Europe corridor. That's one thing which is already in place, a lot of conversations going on. If October 7 had not happened, that would have actually taken on a different shape. But it's beginning to get revived. Second is I2U2, India, US, Israel, and Europe. And so that's another, I2U2 is another initiative. So I think through some of these existing initiatives under the Quad framework, if these 3 or 4 initiatives are sort of revived, the Trump administration calls it the Trust Initiative, which is actually ISET, the initiative for critical and emerging technologies, which was crafted by Jake Sullivan in the last administration, which is still very much there in its second avatar right now. So I think if these few initiatives are looked at more seriously, then I think we are looking at enhancing Indian power in ways that we have never seen before. More importantly, and to your point, Arzan, that there is, first of all, India is not a peer power of China. India is ways, it's a much smaller economy. It has very little power compared to China. The only thing going for India right now is that it has United States as its, as its potential ally going forward, which this opportunity is unprecedented in history. And if we grab this opportunity, I think this can bolster Indian power like no other weapon system.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you, Asha, for that. That really does make sense, especially in the current context. We actually had our Honorable Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, join us at Stanford recently discussing a lot about the India-US partnership and collaboration. So very, very on theme today. So that concludes the first part of the panel. I want to raise the temperature a little bit, move on to a very pressing and hotter topic, if you will, warfare. The nature of warfare is really undergoing a profound transformation, right? Battles are no longer being confined to tanks, trenches, traditional theaters of war. They're being fought in lines of code that are invisible, instantaneous, and often untraceable. Think things like AI, think things like cryptocurrency, that's anonymous payment systems, probably funding non-state actors as we know it. Think about silent wars that are being engaged in the cyberspace right now, propaganda strategies, and more traditional, that is in contrast to the more traditional boots on the ground kind of warfare. And I don't want to say that because of this emerging tech, boots on the ground have gone away. They haven't left us, right? They still are around, and traditional warfare is very much alive today. Ongoing conflicts such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine demonstrate that conventional military aggression such as tanks, artillery, trench warfare, recent attacks by faced by India, continues to play a devastating role in shaping geopolitics. So we are being confronted by warfare on two realms. We're being really confronted by the traditional warfare that we know and the non-conventional warfare that we have to know. So given this critical and deadly dimension of global security, I would like to invite our panel to respond to the following question. With Washington increasingly viewing India as a key partner, and we discussed some of that just now, in terms of counterbalance to China, in terms of its counterbalance to maybe other threats that it sees in the world in both the traditional and non-traditional warfare front, what do you think is the most promising and problematic aspect of the US-India security partnership? And answer me in terms of not just the benefits that India could possibly have, but also how does India retain strategic autonomy in all of this, right? So we can start from Arzan and we can move on to Dr. Sumit after.
Okay. I lied. This is the question that is the whole panel. Where to begin? Okay, so first of all, let me make 2 points. You started, and indulge me for a second because I'm gonna get into semantics, but I think it's important. You started by saying rather that the nature of war is changing, right? I teach my students, there's a difference between the nature of war and the character of war. The character of war is changing because of new technologies. I would submit that is still largely hypothetical, right? We have these new technologies. We don't yet know how they will be used in a state-on-state high-intensity conflict. We'll find that out, sadly, in a few years' time, probably. But for now, it's still hypothetical. The nature of war, however, is not changing. And that is that war is an awful, ugly business, and that anyone who thinks they can control it and achieve effects neatly and cleanly is delusional. And that is salient this week. Okay? My second point is on, what was the second thing you asked about?
About the strategic autonomy that India can reach.
Perfect, yeah. On strategic autonomy. And this I want to juxtapose with the comment that Asha last made, with which I associate myself fully, which is that India's power and influence and capacity relies on its partnership with the United States. And that is in tension with strategic autonomy. Now, I'm not saying that it should be this or that. We just have to recognize that there is a trade-off. Okay? And India has, for its own entirely legitimate, valid political reasons, chosen to retain strategic autonomy, and that's perfectly legitimate. And in fact, in some cases, like in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it proves that maybe there is some wisdom in that position. However, it does run up against the immovable object of building capacity in conjunction with the United States. And so there has to be a recognition that this impulse for strategic autonomy will limit the extent to which Indian power can grow in conjunction with the United States. It comes down to very material things, right? The kit that America sells to India cannot be used to its fullest potential because there are certain bits of equipment that do not work well, that are not interoperable between the US and India. And so unless those sorts of strategic autonomy impulses are overcome, Indian capacity will be limited. And that's a fair enough judgment. That's a fair enough, entirely legitimate stance that New Delhi seems to have taken.
Once again, I find myself in vehement agreement with my colleague Arzan. The quest for strategic autonomy is running up against the building of a more robust US-India strategic partnership. At some point, India needs to set aside the legacies of the Cold War when it was at odds with the United States. It needs to recognize that this is a completely different structure of world power, and India faces a long-term looming threat from the PRC, which it cannot cope with unless it finds a partner of the order of the United States. France may sell India certain forms of high technology and weaponry, but it cannot be a substitute for the United States. And frankly, I don't see any other substitute. That's number one. On the matter of the transformation of warfare, the real transformation of warfare came about in Alamogordo, New Mexico in 1945 with the development of nuclear weapons. That really constituted a revolution in warfare because there is still no mechanism that we have devised that can protect us against nuclear weapons. All you need is one nuclear weapon to be detonated and it'll ruin your day. But short of that, we have not seen a revolution in warfare, and it's too facile to say that cyber weapons constitute a revolution. I simply do not see the evidence. They are an adjunct. They can make life miserable. They can undermine critical infrastructure, but they do not constitute a revolution in warfare. Nuclear weapons did mark that revolution, and that revolution remains in place. So while I think it is important to bolster and strengthen one's defensive capabilities against cyber attacks and protect critical infrastructure, I still think that conventional warfare and nuclear weapons will continue to exert a disproportionate impact on warfare, at least in my limited lifetime.
So, on two fronts. So first of all, I agree completely with what Sumit and Arzan are talking about. But I think there is something else also brewing right now between US and India, which is number one, there is already a very strong partnership between Bangalore and Silicon Valley. Already there is a lot going on from the startup ecosystem side, also from the big company perspective, lots going on AI front, and that is clearing the air and bringing in Washington, D.C. and Delhi in ways that we had not anticipated. So for example, setting standards in artificial intelligence, setting standards for collaboration between the two countries in information and data sharing is something that we had not planned for earlier. So that's coming up, it's happening, and I think I see that again through these initiatives that I spoke about earlier, like ISET and Quad and so on. I do see some of that standard setting happening in the next few months. I also see, in case you think J.D. Vance had gone to India to see the Taj Mahal, that's not true. J.D. Vance was there for a reason. And he had gone with a contingent of people, Ricky Gill, one being, our India guy in the White House. All these people were there for a reason. They are crafting, behind the scenes agreements that we will see results of in the next few weeks, if not months. And, what we are likely to see is perhaps some agreements on communications, on telecom, on partnerships between big Indian conglomerates and the American conglomerates. I also see announcements coming out from Indian side about big Indian companies having a presence in the US now, bringing jobs into middle of America and setting up a shop in the US from the Indian side. In fact, one of the things that I'm hoping we could get Indians to talk about when President Trump visits India in September is an announcement like a Stargate. Remember we had Stargate, does anybody remember Stargate from 2 months ago? Yes, so it was Masayoshi Son, Larry Ellison, and Sam Altman from OpenAI declaring that they will invest $500 billion into US. Similarly, we might actually see an announcement by the Ambanis, Adanis, Tatas and Infosys and a bunch of other companies. It's, announcing an investment in the US, I fully expect that. If that happens, we are looking at another momentum from the business side also, which we have not seen before.
Well, amazing, amazing contributions from our panel today. It's just astounding the kind of range we have covered in our topics, from national security to international security, India's role, China, Pakistan. We have spoken about pretty much everything there is to cover for now in the current setting. I want to moderate that by saying for now, because we don't know what's hitting us next. But I would like to maybe a really short 1-2 line answer from each of you on looking 10 years ahead. Nothing too crazy, not 50 years, not 30 years, just 10 years. What headline would you like to see about India's role in global security in 2035? Just a line or two, a headline. It could be controversial, it's fine.
You go first.
I have to go first. I'd like to see a deepening of the strategic partnership between the United States and India, and one that is not subject to changes of regime, whether in New Delhi or in Washington, D.C. That this partnership should become enduring and should not be subject to the vagaries of shifts in governments.
I can go next. Can I? Should I? Let me go next. Okay, my headline is the following, 2035. Adani invests in American naval shipbuilding ports and in America and strengthens American Navy like never before.
I'll combine these two, and I'll say, see, thesis, antithesis, and I'll say, I think it would be a good thing for the world if India's vision of a multipolar world where India is an independent and powerful pole comes to fruition. It's not there yet, but in 10 years, I would like to see that.
Amazing. Well, that brings an end to our orchestrated panel discussion. But I know some people in the audience have been raging it out, waiting to ask the panel a question. Unfortunately, due to paucity of time, we can maybe accommodate just one question. So bring your brightest, most brilliant question to us. Who do we have over at the back? Wait, I can't see you. You're the one who asked a question earlier too, right? Really killing it, yeah. Yeah, we could get someone else too. Here, we see a hand.
It'll be short.
Just Professor's gonna do the honors. I'm not gonna.
It'll be short. You guys talk about the seriousness of the India-US partnership, right? And I have to be quite frank with you. How serious is it when it's the same US that's still selling Pakistan F-16s? How serious is it when it's the same US that's still giving IMF bailouts to Pakistan? How serious is it when it's the same U.S. that's funding, that's ignoring anti-India institutions? And so I really want to ask you, when will India be recognized as a true power in its own right?
It's not over for you guys.
All right, I'll go. I'll have a first bite. When was the last time the United States sold Pakistan F-16s? The United States cut off military aid to Pakistan in 2018. All right? What you might be referring to is continued spare parts and maintenance, which is a package, a part of the initial contract, right? So, let me put it another way. The United States has quote-unquote right-sized its relationship with Pakistan after an artificial high during the war in Afghanistan. It has reduced it, now more clearly seeing the threat that Pakistan poses to regional security. But let me put it to you this way. Let's say the war kicks off soon, and let's say the war goes bad. Remember, the nature of war is to serve itself, to escalate, to become more intense, to draw in other partners. And let's say we confront a horrific situation that is unprecedented. then who is going to be in a position to pick up the phone to Pindi? Is it going to be Beijing? Do you want Beijing to pick up the phone to Pindi? Or do you want someone in the White House to do it?
I completely agree with, again, everything Arzan has said, and the amount that the US is providing to Pakistan. By the way, the F-16s were transferred in 1981. I vividly remember this is one of the great advantages of being old. There are very few, but this is one of them. Arzan is right that aid to Pakistan was terminated in 2018. The total amount that is being provided for weaponry is $397 million, which is a rounding error. And furthermore, in terms of the IMF loans, there are regulations that prevent the politicization of loans to countries. That's built into the IMF's charter. Now, in extremis, the US can cut off the IMF loan. But the problem with that is Pakistan is again on the brink of bankruptcy. And cutting off the IMF loan actually could have significant consequences for social instability in Pakistan. Not that it is a model of stability to begin with.
2 seconds here. If a war breaks out between Pakistan and India, India and joined by Israel will decimate Pakistan in a matter of days.
That ends our panel with a total banger, that last sentence, but she delivered. So we have had the most amazing discussion and time with our brilliant panelists here, and we're very happy to have had you and hosted you during your time here. We hope you have a great time for whatever time you're here at Stanford too. Thank you so much, all of y'all, for engaging us, for giving us your attention and time, and joining us today. This is a very important issue. I hope you have some takeaways that are important. Thank you.
Some food for thought for everybody.